Cool. Speaking of going to space, is anyone here interested in traveling to space? Our speaker today, he has spent over 229 days in space. He was the ISS commander for Expedition 10. He served as the chief astronaut officer for the EVA branch. He also served on the White House, appointed review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee, and he currently serves on the NASA Advisory Council. He has flown space missions and worked closely with Russian, Japanese, and European astronauts and their affiliated space agencies. Our speaker today is uniquely qualified to speak about the United States, Russian, Japanese, European, and Chinese space programs. So let's see what kind of insights he has in regards to current space development. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you today our guest speaker, Dr. Leroy Chiao. Let's please welcome him.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to join this HASSE webinar. I'm very happy to be with you all today. Very impressive. We have so many people from so many countries. This is really a wonderful thing. And as you heard, my name is Leroy Chiao, and I'm an astronaut. Over my 15-year NASA career, I did fly 4 times into space. My first 3 missions were on space shuttles, and then I trained with the Russians. I flew on a Russian rocket to the International Space Station, where I served as the commander and NASA science officer during Expedition 10, which was a 6.5-month flight. I was inspired to be an astronaut by the Apollo 11 moon landing. I was 8 years old back then, and last year was the 50th anniversary. We're coming up on the 51st anniversary. And I'd like so long ago, I remember like it was yesterday, and that's how the dream started for me to want to try to become an astronaut myself. And so I worked very hard in school, and I did everything I could to do the very best I could so I could go to university. I studied engineering. I earned 3 degrees in engineering and chemical engineering, and did everything I could to stay in good health because I knew that astronauts had to be in very good health. And so after I finished my degrees and worked for a while, I did apply to NASA. And then after all that, I was actually selected. And that was a very exciting day, as you can imagine. This is kind of a funny picture. This is from obviously a long time ago. I think we're coming up on 30 years and maybe 20 pounds ago, but I still remember like it was yesterday. As I mentioned, over my 15 years, I did get to fly 4 missions. My first missions were on space shuttles, and 4 years after arriving, I got to get into my first space shuttle Columbia, and fly into space. Over all those missions, I got to do a lot of different things in space. Of course, I did research work, with the main purpose of a lot of the missions, and especially the International Space Station, is scientific research. But I also got to do spacewalks, what we call extra-vehicular activity, in both American and in Russian spacesuits. I did a total of 6 spacewalks, and they were all in support of the design and the construction. I actually helped to build the International Space Station. After I flew my 3 shuttle missions, I did train to go fly to the International Space Station for my long flights. It was very, very interesting training in Russia and getting to know the cosmonauts and the specialists over there. And of course, very interesting flying aboard the Russian Soyuz rocket. Very, very different experience than flying aboard a space shuttle. Space flight really is a magical experience. It's a life-changing experience. I don't think anyone flies into space without some pretty serious thinking about what life is all about and what else is out there. Our favorite thing to do when we're up in space is to look back at the Earth and take photographs. And on my space station mission, I shot over 16,000 photographs of the Earth. I'll just show you a few here today. This is New York City, Manhattan. You can see what's possible on a clear day with a little bit of practice. We're using all handheld photography, big long lenses and handheld cameras. And you can see some of the details of the city there. Here's the southern tip of Florida, a very beautiful part of the world, South Florida and the Bahamas. The blues and greens are unlike anywhere else in the world. They really kind of jump out at you. Here's some glaciers in Patagonia in Argentina. Very, very striking. Here are the Great Pyramids at Giza in Egypt. You can see the two big ones pretty clearly in the middle of your screen. If you look down from the two big ones, you can see the third smaller one. And if you look to the left of the third smaller one, you can make out the outline of the Sphinx. This is one of my favorites. This is Lake Nasser in Egypt. And I was able to capture this photograph when the sun was just at the right angle to reflect almost perfectly off the surface of the water into the camera lens. This is what it really looked like out the window just for a moment, and I was able to take a picture of it. Well, finally, this is one of my favorites. This is, of course, a picture of the moon. I took this from the station using the long lens, Mother Earth on the left side, home planet for all of us. And that blue in the middle is what surprised me the most. The first time I flew into space, I looked back at the Earth and I saw that our sun, the sunlight passing through our atmosphere, makes it glow, these beautiful shades of blue. And so this picture to me says dreams, which is where it begins. And that kind of dovetails nicely with the HASSE tagline, which is have a big dream and believe in it. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Caleb and we can begin our discussion. And I'm looking forward to getting your questions and answering your questions.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leroy. That was really beautiful photography. That must have taken a lot of practice to get a steady hand because the ISS travels at quite a fast speed, doesn't it? What's the speed that the ISS travels?
Yeah, the ISS travels around at about 25,000 kilometers a second, which works out to right around 25,000 kilometers per hour, which works out to about 7 kilometers every second. So you've got to you got to learn to pan the target with your camera, track it as you release the shutter. You have to focus. And you better use your feet to hold on to something or you're just going to float away from the window. So it takes a little bit of practice, but as you can see, with a little practice, you can get pretty good.
I can imagine. Those are fantastic photos. So you've done a very good job.
Thank you.
So you've been in space. You spent a lot of time in space, over 229 days in space. What was it like when you first went to space? What were some of the most memorable moments that you had in space?
Well, of course, getting up into space for the very first time was a surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, emotional thing because I dreamed about it so long since I was very young, and I'd worked very hard and gone to school and gotten through all of that and jumped through some hoops, got a few lucky breaks, got interviewed by NASA, selected, and then finally trained for a mission, and then now going for the very first time. You can imagine it was just so exciting. Once I got up into space, I looked back at the Earth, and I just struck just how colorful and beautiful our Earth is, and it was kind of an emotional moment. So that was a very that's something I remember, that feeling and just the first view of the Earth. Even though I'd seen photographs, movies, and talked to people about it, there's nothing like it. As you know from your own experiences, there's nothing like seeing something with your own eyes. A fantastic moment.
Definitely, yeah. That must have been, I can't even imagine, but that must have been probably one of the most incredible things you've ever seen.
Right, absolutely.
Cool. What are some of the main obstacles that you encounter while you're in space, whether you're on the ISS or doing a spacewalk? What are some of the main obstacles that you're encountering during that time?
Sure. The main obstacles or main difficulties or surprises, maybe not surprises, but things you have to learn to deal with is the microgravity, the lack of gravity. It's things are floating around. I mean, you're floating around, so you're already feeling weird until your body adjusts to that. And then you have to learn how to operate. You can't just put things down, obviously, because they'll float away. That's why pretty much everything we have up there has a little piece of Velcro on it, so you can Velcro it to a wall. But even if you Velcro things to a wall, if somebody brushes up against it and knocks it loose, it can get lost, right? So that's one of the frustrating things about operating in zero G is it's so easy to lose things. Now, most of the time when you lose something, it ends up in the air filters, but sometimes things get lost for a long period of time, and sometimes they get lost basically forever. You never find them. And it's kind of amazing because some of the things that you lose are pretty big. I remember when I was on the ISS, I had a Ziploc bag with some memory cards in it, and they were important. Of course, everything's important. Somehow they came loose from where I had them attached, And we spent probably 45 minutes looking for them. This big Ziploc bag that should have just been floating around somewhere. And then, we were like, where could it possibly be? And then it just kind of comes floating out into the cabin, so it's just that's the biggest frustration. I think the biggest obstacle is trying not to lose things.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. I remember learning last year when I led one of the space schools in Houston. I remember learning that an astronaut's best friend is Velcro.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you see pictures of you guys up in space, and you've got Velcro all over your pants and all over your shirts and stuff. And at first I was like, why do they have Velcro and everything? And an astronaut said to me, they were like, well, if you don't have Velcro, then you don't know where anything is. Or when you're eating lunch, you have to Velcro your food to your leg, or else your food's going to float away. Kind of thing.
And so you do learn to work differently up there, because like eating, for example, unlike here where you have a plate of food and you can take a bite of this and a bite of that, you quickly learn in space that you only open one food packet at a time. You don't want a bunch of food packets open. So you only eat one course at a time, then throw that piece of trash away and get the next one out. Otherwise you got too much to manage. And if something, you don't want things starting to get free and food floating all over the cabin.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you so much. It was very fun and interactive. What were some of the emotions that you experienced prior to your space expeditions? Oh, you mentioned a little bit about the excitement before you, like when you got selected and before you actually took off and went up. But this question is more like, how did your emotions vary from first expedition to your second, third, and fourth expedition?
Sure. Well, one thing that people like to ask about is, well, were you nervous? Did you, think about the risk? And of course we think about the risk, because we're very well aware that we're getting onto a big fuel tank, and with rocket engines, high pressure, high speed turbo pumps, there's a lot of moving parts and things have to go well. And so we're very well aware of the risk. But it's interesting, for your very first flight, for my first flight, I didn't, of course I was aware, but I didn't think that much about the risk, because I was so excited to get a chance, my first chance to fly into space. And then what I found is that with each subsequent mission, I thought a little bit more about the risk. Okay, let's see, what am I doing up there this time that I'm going to go risk my life again? Because it's not a tiny risk. It's a significant risk. But interestingly, you start thinking a little more, and that's why I was glad that on every one of my missions, I was doing something different. My first mission was a research flight, so we spent 2 weeks doing scientific research in space. My second mission, I was focused on doing spacewalks. We were going out testing tools and construction methods that we would later use to build the ISS. My third mission, we went up to help build the ISS. We brought 2 big pieces and went out doing spacewalks to attach them to the station. Wow. And then my fourth flight with the Russians, flying on a Russian rocket. I was going to be the overall commander of the station for 6.5 months. So I was really happy that all of my missions were very different and built upon the experience from my previous flights. So I had a very rewarding 15-year career, and just had so much, got to do so much, and I was very grateful for all of that.
Cool. What does the role of a commander look like on the ISS, as opposed to just like a researcher or, yeah?
Yeah, the commander, of course, just like commander of anything, you have the overall responsibility for the success of the mission. And so most of the work of the commander is done on the ground during training. And so you want to make sure that you've got the resources allocated and they're going to be up there for you. You need to make sure that you all get the training you need. You feel like everybody's ready to go. You need to work closely with the mission control, the flight directors, the mission management, the NASA management, the training team. So you're kind of coordinating in an informal way, because even though you're the commander, it's not like the military where the top general can just give an order and everybody does it, right? Here we've got different groups. They all have their own responsibilities. And as the commander, we're the ones that are going to be up there. So I kind of had to work with all these people to make sure that everything was, I thought that, we were going to have what we needed. And that, of course, then you're on the Russian side too. And the Russians, They have their own structure and their own people. So it's a matter of, bringing in interpersonal skills, internationally even, to, work with them. Of course, we had to go to Canada to train with the Canadians on how to use the robotic arm that was attached to both the space shuttles and the space station. And so, it's a little bit of a mix of all these things. You learn to be kind of an ambassador. You learn to be, a little more forceful when you need to be, or, to kind of figure out a way to get what you need. And then once you're in the mission, that's the easy part. Once you get up into the space station, then everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The teams are all working well together. And that's actually the easy part. Right.
So it's about 90% prep work and 10% actual mission work.
Absolutely, yes.
Cool. Wow, that's a big difference than most jobs.
Right.
So, in regards to most jobs, would you recommend space travel to everyone, or do you think it's a very specific type of person that should go to space or that could go to space?
Well, of course, if you want to go to space, or the people who should go to space are people who are passionate about it, people who really want to go, right? Because, like I said, it's we're never going to eliminate the risk. I mean, when you're talking about rocket engines, I mean, these are complex pieces of equipment and they have to work. And so, in order, you have to do your own risk reward balance and decide that, you really want to go do this and it's worth taking those risks, right? So that's number one. Number two, spacecraft can be pretty small. I mean, the shuttle was pretty roomy, it's definitely pretty roomy. Even with 7 astronauts, you could stretch your arms and legs in your seat and it was pretty comfortable. Soyuz is a tiny little capsule. I mean, you're wedged in there with 2 other people in your pressure suits. It's a tiny little capsule. You can't be the least bit claustrophobic. If you're claustrophobic, being an astronaut or flying into space is not for you. And you have to be in good health. I mean, it's not that the actual physical effect of launch are that strenuous. I think it's more the excitement, and some people might be a little nervous, and so you've got to be in good health. That's why NASA's very focused on your heart. Make sure that your heart is in good shape, so that if you really get worked up, that you're not going to have any issues there. So there are a lot of different factors to determine whether an individual should or shouldn't go fly into space.
Yeah, I can imagine if you have some sort of a anxiety issues, imagine the G-force wouldn't be very nice.
Right, yeah, so that kind of person would not be good for space flight.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily tall. I'm about 6'1", about 182 centimeters tall, and I've sat in a remodel of the Mercury 1, and I did not.
Oh
fit.
Boy. Yeah, those capsules were tiny. Now, astronauts, for U.S. astronauts, we follow the guidelines or the rules for the military pilots. So I think that spans the height requirement is anywhere between 5 feet tall to 6'4".
Okay.
And so, but it's narrows for the Soyuz, the Russian Soyuz, because people of a certain stature can't fit into those seats. And it actually has more to do with sitting height than your overall height. So if your sitting height, from your torso to your head, that height is actually more the critical dimension.
Right. Yeah. Because you're sitting in that capsule for how long? Like you got to climb in there, you got to get in your seat, you got to buckle up, and then you got to wait for them to take off. And they take this however long. So how long are you stuck in that capsule?
Well, we strapped into the vehicle. It was actually the same as the space shuttle, more or less. We get into the vehicle about 2.5 hours before launch. And on the space shuttle, once we got to space, we could unstrap. It's very quick to get up into space. Once you launch, it's somewhere around 9 minutes when you get up into low Earth orbit and the main engines have shut down. But in the case of the Soyuz, it takes the Soyuz, you have to go 2 orbits around the Earth because they don't have the satellite communication system we do. And so they have to come and pass over their ground stations, and then the spacecraft can send signals down to the ground. And it takes 2 passes to get enough data down to the engineers in the Mission Control Center for them to say, okay, everything on the spacecraft looks healthy. You don't have to make an emergency return, so go ahead and unstrap and you can get out of your seats. Each orbit takes 1.5 hours, so that's an additional 3 hours. So all told, you're in that seat for about 5.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
That's a long time.
I hope they're padded seats.
Well, they are. But the issue really isn't that. It's that the way the seats are, they've got your knees bent up towards your chest. And so
Oh,
that can get pretty uncomfortable, you know.
cool. So about Launch America that's going to happen later on today. Do you know how long NASA's been preparing for this, and why the stop or the pause for about 10 years?
When after the Space Shuttle Columbia accident, the nation just really, that was really stunning for all of us, especially those of us in the business, those of us at NASA. Those were our friends. We knew those people very well. And then, it was decided, not by us, but by the White House, that we were going to retire the space shuttles after the space station had been, assembly of the space station had been completed. We needed the space shuttles to bring up all the big pieces of the space station and to help put it together with the robotics and things like that. And so that was slated for, mid 2011. And so immediately they began plans for the next program. And so that's how the Orion capsule was put forth, and the new rocket, which back then was called Ares. And so work started on those things with the idea of going back to the moon. And the initial projections back then, and in the early 2000s, was that, okay, well, this new program, we think we'll be able to launch by 2012. So if we retire the shuttle in 11, then we'll only have a 1-year gap before we have a new spacecraft that's flying. And of course, that didn't work out, right? So Orion is still being developed. First launch date of Orion is not a done deal. I think we're not really certain exactly what the first launch date will be. And so you mentioned that I was a member of the Review of U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee, a White House committee some years ago, 2008, 2009. One of the options we put forth for the new administration was, hey, look, maybe NASA should assist some of these commercial companies and help them develop the capability of launching astronauts to and from the space station, because it looks like Orion's being delayed farther and farther out. So that might be the fastest way we can get back into space from American soil. And so that was adopted. And so SpaceX and Boeing are the two companies that have been receiving assistance since around 2010, 11, that time frame. And so SpaceX, of course, had already been working on the Dragon because Elon Musk already had intended to launch astronauts into space on his spacecraft. And so Dragon had already been in development for a few years, but then they were selected as one of the candidates, one of the entities for this new commercial crew program. And so it's taken a little longer than we expected. So from 2011, 12 till now, it's about 8 years. Maybe it doesn't sound like a long time now, but just consider that the Apollo program, remember I talked about Apollo 11 landing on the moon. We went from NASA not even existing to the first landing on the moon, no rockets, no spacecraft. We developed all that in a span of just under 11 years. And that's pretty amazing, So, but you know what? I'm glad we're finally here, and we're on the verge of launching NASA astronauts back into orbit from U.S. soil on a commercial spacecraft. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed for later today that we see a great launch.
Yeah, it's going to be very good. So we know that SpaceX is going to send people to space. Can you give us more of an insight about their possible business opportunities and what other private space travel companies, such as Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, are involved in this new space frontier, and what might be some of their goals?
Sure. The idea of this commercial program was that NASA helps these companies develop the capability, then they're free to go sell their services to other buyers, other clients, and other entities. And so SpaceX already has announced that they're in discussions with another company that wants to put a commercial module on the space station. And this company that's doing that would use SpaceX as the provider to bring crew, commercial astronauts, not necessarily NASA astronauts, maybe commercial astronauts or their private astronauts, if you will, and even what we call the spaceflight participants, or kind of the tourists. Even they would launch aboard SpaceX spacecraft to go dock to the space station to take part in this commercial venture. So that's one example. Right. Elon Musk, of course, wants to colonize Mars. He himself has said many times that he started SpaceX specifically because he wants to put people on Mars. he wants to go travel to Mars and he wants to live on Mars. And so that is the driving force there to develop the new Starship that SpaceX is working on, as well as a new Falcon Super Heavy booster designed to be a fully reusable system. And so that's very exciting. Other companies that are involved, you mentioned Blue Origin. Of course, Jeff Bezos has been working on Blue Origin, self-funding Blue Origin, from his own profits from Amazon ever since its beginning. Again, sometime in the early 2000s is when he started. And so they are working on a family of at least partially, if not fully, reusable rockets, and following kind of the SpaceX model or developing them in parallel. They've got a vehicle called the New Shepard, which is going to be a suborbital vehicle that's designed to take tourists for the astronaut experience, the space experience, to touch space and come back down. And so I'm not sure. They've been pretty secretive. I'm not sure when they plan to begin operations, but they've had some very successful flight tests, not with people on board, but uncrewed flight tests. The other entities, Virgin Galactic, of course, they have a space plane that they're launching, and they have touched the edge of space. In their case, they've gone up 50 miles, which is not quite the von Karman line, which is kind of the internationally recognized official boundary of space, which is 100 kilometers or about 62 miles. But the old definition of space that the U.S. used back in the 50s and 60s was 50 miles. And so they're arguing as well, we did get over 50 miles. But anyway, either way you dice it, it doesn't matter too much. You get up to that altitude, you're essentially in space, and you can have that experience, albeit only for a few minutes. So those are some of the big players in the commercial space arena, and I would expect to see, Boeing, of course. Boeing is developing their Starliner. That's kind of the functional equivalent of SpaceX's Dragon. It's being designed and built to take astronauts commercially from U.S. soil to and from the International Space Station. So those are kind of the big players that are out there right today.
Cool, very cool. I heard recently information that Tom Cruise is actually going to go up to the ISS to film a movie up there.
I saw that news as well. And NASA PAO, Public Affairs, confirmed that they are in discussion with Tom Cruise and some folks about possibly sending him up there. And that would be aboard a SpaceX spacecraft to go and film a movie. And so there have been a lot of these kinds of discussions over the years. I'm sure it's not a done deal. And when it is a done deal, I'm sure there'll be a huge announcement. But, if and when it happens. But yeah, that is a very real thing that is being discussed.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, because it's kind of along the lines of that tourist experience that SpaceX or Virgin Galactica could offer.
Right.
That's cool. So another question we have, the former NASA administrator, Doug Lavero, he is departing from the space agency after just 6 months. The plan is to go to the moon in 2024. What's your take on his resignation? And it seems really quick. Do you think there's some kind of politics involved, maybe, or why do you think he only lasted for 6 months and then was out?
Well, there are politics involved in everything, and that's something I learned later in life. As an engineer, I like the world to be black and white, but I eventually learned or accepted that the world is full of gray. And just to make a small correction, he was not the NASA administrator. He was the NASA Associate Administrator for Spaceflight, but a very, very senior official. Now, he replaced a guy named Bill Gerstenmaier, who was in that position for a very, very long time, very competent, very well respected. But the bottom line with Bill, and I have great respect for Bill, is that I think he basically told the administration that, we're very unlikely to get to the moon in 2024 unless certain things happen. And I don't see, I don't see you guys making that happen or helping to make that happen. So he was basically asked to leave or demoted, and then he left. And then Doug Lavero was brought in to replace him. I really didn't know much about Doug Lavero before he took over that position, but having been until very recently a member of the NASA Advisory Council Human and Exploration Operations Committee, I participated in some teleconference, video meetings, in the situation we're in, just several weeks ago. And I found him to be very impressive. He has done some very impressive things in his career in program management and bringing programs to to fruition, and he was dedicated to trying to get us to the moon in 2024. He talked about reorganizations and restructuring that he was putting in place. He had, under his leadership, put out contracts to teams to start working on landers to get us to the moon, because that's really what we call the long pole, is developing a lander that can take humans down to the surface of the moon. And so, he was told by the vice president to do what needs to be done to get us there by 2024. So he was working really hard trying to do that. And then only weeks later, he was asked to resign. And so I don't know officially what happened, but the people in the industry, people who know things, or people who, we all talk a little bit. So it seems the story is maybe he took some shortcuts in figuring out how to award those contracts to those lander teams. And not that he did anything improper, but maybe he took some shortcuts that people didn't like. And so everybody has their detractors, and probably his detractors took those things and were successfully able to use the politics to force him to resign. So that was an unfortunate thing. I'm not saying that we cannot get to the moon by 2024. It was already going to be very, very ambitious, and now it's even more ambitious goal. And I have to say, if I was a betting person, especially with his departure, I would say our chances are much less now of actually reaching that goal of landing on by 2024.
Yeah, which bumps the idea of landing in Mars in the 2030s. It's probably going to bump that back even more to maybe the 2040s.
Yes, and what I like to say about Mars is I'm very hopeful that we'll see a Mars landing by humans in my lifetime. But I like to say, well, we've been 20 years from Mars since 1969, because when we landed on the moon in 69, everybody said by 1990 we'll be on Mars. And then of course it's 20 years. And when NASA was making a big push for Mars in the early 2000s, well, it's going to be in the 2020s. We're going to land on Mars, and so kind of keeps getting pushed out because, it's not that we don't have the technology. We need the political will and the money to go do it. And so what's exciting now, I mentioned earlier about SpaceX, Elon Musk, I've had a chance to meet Elon Musk a couple of times over the years. And I actually was working and helping a little bit with SpaceX up until very recently. I was part of the SpaceX Safety Advisory Panel, and we were formed in 2012. And we've been, kind of an advisory committee on the development of the Crew Dragon, which hopefully will launch today. And so the reason I said until recently is because a few weeks ago, we all voted thumbs up that the Dragon was ready to fly. And then our charter was over. So our panel was kind of disbanded. But, Elon Musk is a driven guy. He wants to go to Mars. Everything that he's done, people have said was impossible. It was impossible to bring back first stages from rockets and reuse them, but he's doing it on a regular basis now. It's impossible for him to create this new idea of an electric car, yet he's doing it. So I think that's the exciting wild card, is that, I believe that he's going to get to Mars. And now maybe we can do that in partnership with NASA, expand the partnership that they have today with the Crew Dragon, and maybe they can get there together more quickly and better. Who knows? But anyway, I think that's what gives me hope that maybe we will get to Mars, maybe sometime in the 2030s.
Hopefully, it sounds exciting. Can you give us some insights to the Artemis program? We know there's still a very considerable gap between the moon and Mars. Like I've heard, it takes almost 8 months to get to Mars, whereas the moon, you can get there in a day. And so, as one of the on the NASA Advisory Council members, why did NASA decide to launch the Artemis program since it's been so quiet after the Apollo program?
Right. Well, the Artemis program, basically, we were already on track to develop a mission to the moon and then on to Mars. But, the president and the White House decided, well, we really want to get to the moon sooner rather than later. And so that's how Artemis was born. The date 2024, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why 2024, if you look at when presidential elections are, and that was going to be the next cycle. And so it's pretty clear that, the president wanted us to be back on the moon during his administration. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying, look, it's good to set ambitious goals, but this one might be a little too ambitious. But it's not impossible. And NASA has unfortunately been put in kind of a difficult position. They really need the resources. If the president can deliver the money and get the Congress to approve the money, then there's a chance of succeeding by 2024. And so Artemis is a dash, if you will, try to get to the moon quickly, similar, not dissimilar, I should say, to Apollo, but it's going to be a fast track program. And then we use pieces of that fast track program to go back and try to build and launch other hardware that can help us sustainably explore the moon and then, venture on to Mars. And so I think 2024 is the only thing that's for sure right now, the big, defined goal. But we may not get there in 2024, but I'm hopeful that if we get far enough down in this program, that even if we don't make it by 2024, we'll still make it not too many years later after that.
Yeah. Definitely. You can't force something like this to happen. If it's not ready, it's not ready.
No, right.
Yeah. So besides America, Japan has also started to build a space force. What's your take on Japan's space police force?
Yeah, I don't know much about that. In fact, it's a little. I guess I really didn't know about it at all until we were discussing it the other day. The U.S. Space Force, as far as I know, is basically took the part of the Air Force that is called Space Command, and it seems like those responsibilities have been moved over to the new line called Space Force. Right. And maybe it makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, the Air Force, I think, was doing fine running that part of our defense structure. But, maybe it was time for a change. I'm certainly not an expert on those things. The fact that Japan is following us does not surprise me. Japan has been a very loyal and supportive partner in things like space exploration and Space Force. Let's make sure we don't mix it up, because Space Force is a part of the military, whereas NASA is not. NASA does all the explorations, and the military part, military satellites, military rockets, and all that. Those are all part of, was part of the Air Force, and now it's part of Space Force. So I imagine Japanese Space Force is going to parallel the U.S. That is, Japan has their own rockets that launch military satellites, surveillance satellites, things like that. So I would imagine they did the same thing we did. They took the function from their own Air Force that was taking care of that, and they created a Space Force to be kind of like us.
Yeah, something they can kind of expand, I guess, their Air Force with.
Right. So they just kind of carved out that piece of the Air Force, similar to what we've done.
Cool. Awesome. Could you say something to the students, because we've got a lot of students watching and a lot of other people watching, but say something to the students that are very interested and want to become an astronaut or want to get involved in the space field, whether it be an engineer or a scientist or a developer or researcher or anything like that.
Sure.
What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I always talk about the importance of having a dream, right? And just like HASSE does, the importance of having that dream. And now, having said that, you want to work hard towards that dream, but you have to be realistic as well. That is, you have to really give yourself an honest assessment. Do I have a chance of reaching this goal? For example, if I wanted to play basketball in the NBA, there's no way I could do that. I don't have the talent. I don't have the physical size, and so for me to have a dream to be an NBA player would be unrealistic. Right. But if you want to be an astronaut, of course, if you can do well in school, if you're healthy, if you can stay healthy, of course, you have a chance of making that happen. Now, once you decide on your goal, you need to figure out a path. How am I going to get there? What do I need to study? What school should I go to? And once you figure out that path and have the courage to go down that path, work hard. Everything takes hard work, everything. One of the very hardest thing I've ever done in my life is to get my undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. And I worked so hard to get through there, and it still is the hardest thing I've ever done. But you get through all that, and it's the recipe for success, whether you want to be an astronaut, an engineer, and whether you want to work at NASA or somewhere else, whether you want to be in the arts, whatever your goal is, it takes hard work, but the recipe for success is the same. Do the very best you can in school. Do the very best you can. Take it seriously, and then do the very best you can to take care of your health too. So important to have a healthy body, be physically and mentally healthy, because then that's going to allow you to really reach your full potential.
Wonderful, thanks. And as a HASSE special advisor, what would you say is a unique highlight of the HASSE Space School program?
Well, I think one of the unique things about the HASSE program is the fact that you do have these students from all around the world coming to participate in the program. And it's great to go to these sessions and meet people from all around the world that have that same common passion for space exploration, who are excited to participate. And then, people like you, Caleb, who stay on and start to be part of the organization. I think that's really cool. And I think that's kind of unique that HASSE has such an international reach and brings students from so many different countries together.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to some of the questions that people have been asking in the panel.
Sure.
Can you see those questions? Do you want me to read them out for you?
Yeah, go ahead and read them. I don't.
All right, I'll read them. All right. So the one with the most votes so far is, what do you think about aliens and the video from the Pentagon about UFOs?
I believe that there is other life out in the universe. In fact, I believe there's intelligent life all over the universe. Now, the problem is the universe is so vast that I don't think we've been visited. I don't think there are UFOs that bring aliens to the Earth. We don't know. We can't find each other, and we'll never find each other. We're just too far apart. As far as the things like what was released by the Navy, the UFOs that the fighter planes tracked, those kinds of reports have been coming out for decades. And what they've always turned out to be are secret military programs. The Navy doesn't necessarily know what the Air Force is working on, or they don't necessarily know what the CIA is working on, or things like that. So these could be, very maneuverable, high-speed drones that we just don't know about.
Yeah, cool. All right, sorry, that question was from Matthias Orlana. The next question is from Vincent Prieto, and he is asking, what do you think you most miss when you are in space?
Besides family and friends, of course, which we can keep in touch with, like we're doing here during the pandemic through video conferencing, telephone calls, and email. The thing I missed the most was nature. I really missed feeling the wind on my face and smelling the smell of grass and hearing birds chirp and watching squirrels run around. That's what I really missed. And so, we could see the beauty of the Earth, an incredible beauty of the Earth, but we were in a very sterile environment. We were basically in a laboratory environment, observing from far away. And, it was great to be able to do that, but there was nothing like being in nature.
Yeah, you're not really going to get that experience when we get to Mars, are we?
No. That's people don't get it. They talk about these one-way missions, which I don't believe in, and a week into it, they're going to be really sick of seeing the color red, I think, and not having any lakes or oceans or and having to wear a spacesuit every time you go out.
Yeah, you go out for a walk and you got to take 15 minutes to put your gear on.
It takes longer than 15 minutes to get a spacesuit on and do all the checks. It takes hours.
Okay. Oh, wow. All right. So next question is from Andres Pino. Says, can you see space trash when you're in orbit? Is it very serious? What do you think about it?
Well, orbital debris is our biggest concern for spacecraft. And that's why spacecraft all have shielding. Now, if you get hit by a big enough piece, your shielding is not going to be able to stop it, right? And so that is our biggest concern. But no, you can't see it. And of course, we can track it. Not we, but the Defense Department tracks it with radar. And so they know where the bigger pieces are. But the smaller ones we can't track, and you can't see it. I mean, you're moving so fast, it's moving so fast, you never see it.
Right. So when you're doing like an EVA, a spacewalk, are there little tiny bits of debris that are maybe like bouncing off your spacesuit or bouncing off the ISS?
It can happen. Each space shuttle mission came back with little dings in the windows and the heat shield from little tiny, sand particle size pieces of debris. And so it's out there. And if you get hit by a big enough one, if you're unlucky enough to be doing EVA and you get hit by one, well, that could be pretty bad. But it hasn't happened. hasn't happened, at least not yet.
Oh, that's good. All right, the next question is from Cha-Xin Wu. Are there any suggestions for people on Earth to prepare for near future private space travel, especially in psychological and mental aspects?
Well, certainly, like I said, you need to be in good health, but more than physical health, as we discussed earlier, mental health is important too. If you prone to anxiety, maybe it's not for you. If you're claustrophobic, it's certainly not for you. And so, I don't know what you can do, not being a specialist in those things, to try to minimize or counteract those kinds of feelings. But you really do need to be in pretty good physical and mental condition in order to go fly, and have the right attitude in order to go fly into space. So I'm not sure what you do to prepare those things. Now, of course, you can take steps to keep yourself as physically healthy as possible, having a good diet, getting enough sleep, and getting exercise, things like that.
Right on. Thank you. Next question is from Bruno Escarate. Sorry if I don't say your name correctly. I speak English, and that's it. And Bruno is asking, sorry, one second. Let's see. Bruno is asking, what are the most important ways that biomedical research can contribute to space travel?
Biomedically, space flight, there's a lot of biomedical effects on the body, the human body, during space flight, and none of them are good, right there. And so that's the biggest technical challenge we have, is before we can send people to Mars, how do we keep these people healthy? There's a lot more radiation you're exposed to up there. Our atmosphere and our magnetic fields around our Earth protect us here on the Earth from radiation. But up there, you're exposed to a lot more. And also just being in zero gravity. The body is used to being here on Earth with one gravity, 1G. And so your body functions a little bit differently up there. There's all kinds of different things that happen. You've probably seen in the news over the years, over 70% of the astronauts that go up to ISS for 6 months or so come back with changes in their eyesight. And in some cases, they've come back with permanent eye damage. And we don't fully understand what's going on. And so those are some examples of the biomedical challenges that we have to figure out what we call countermeasures for before we can send crews to Mars.
Right. Thank you. Josephine Pinky Legas is asking, do you follow a meal routine in space, like a set specific time for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Like what time zone do you guys go off of, I guess?
Yes, so we work off of what's called Greenwich Mean Time, which is the standard for aviation time and for navigation. And of course, it's the time in Greenwich, England, where they kind of keep the official timepiece. And so that's what we go off of. And it's kind of a compromise between Houston time and Moscow time, where the two big control centers are. But we work off of GMT, and we don't have exact breakfast, lunch, and dinner times. They vary a little bit. Depending on what's going on, but they're roughly, the same, whatever, 6 hours apart or whatever we do here on Earth, kind of 5 hours apart.
Cool. Cha-Xin Wu is asking, how long did it take for you to adapt? To adapt to normal gravity after going back from outer space to the Earth?
Yeah, after coming back from a shuttle mission, even a short shuttle mission, it takes you a few days to feel like you're back to normal, the dizziness and things like that. After a 6-month flight or more, it takes a little longer. It took us about a week, which is very fast. We may have been one of the, if not the fastest crew, then one of the fastest crew to readapt after such a long mission. And that's because we took the exercise very seriously before, during, and after the mission. Okay. And so, about a week later, I felt pretty much back to normal. But most crews take, 3 or 4 weeks, and some crews take even longer before they feel like they're back to normal.
Cool. Thank you. Next question from Vanessa Ortiz. She's asking, how do you sleep in space?
So sleeping in space is actually pretty comfortable. Your body just assumes kind of a natural posture. And if you get into a swimming pool and totally relax, your body will kind of assume that posture, right? And so it's very comfortable once you get used to it. And what we do is we have little sleeping compartments, which are about the size of a small closet. And we zip ourselves up in our sleeping bag and close the door. And then we just kind of float around in there.
That's fun. And there's no real up or down in the ISS, is there? So you can.
That's right. Without gravity, there's up or down has no meaning. You know, without gravity, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. Our next question is from Francisco Julio. They say, how do you train to resist the G-force?
We don't really do any training to resist the G-force, and the G-force is not as bad. It's not like the movies. Even launching aboard a Soyuz, you know, where we pull more G's than we used to on the shuttle, it's not sustained until near the end of the flight, and then it's only for a few minutes. And we only get up to a maximum of about 5 G's. That sounds like a lot, but you just feel pressure on your chest, and it takes a little more effort to breathe, but it's not really uncomfortable or stressful. It's okay. And we do have centrifuge runs. We do get in the centrifuge. So we do some training in centrifuges, so we know what it feels like. We have a big centrifuge run that's a medical evaluation. And so you can feel what even more G's feel like. I was spun up to a maximum of 8 G's, you know, during the medical evaluation. So it's, you know, you get used to it. It's not as big a deal as you might think.
Cool. Thank you. Another question, this one's from Edna M. Evangelista. She's asking, what are your preparations when you plan to travel to outer space?
Well, plans, of course, you're training for quite a number of years to go fly a space station mission, so you've got a lot of time to plan. And then as you get closer, of course, you know, you're looking over all your gear, your equipment, make sure you've got everything you want and need. You've got what's called a crew notebook, where you can write notes to yourself about different things that just reminders of certain things that are your responsibility that you don't want to forget. And so those are kind of some of the little things that you're doing. And of course, you're putting your life in order too. You know, I mean, it's making sure. I mean, it might sound a little bit weird, but it's a responsible thing to do. Getting your things like your will in order in case something bad happens. You know, making sure everyone's taken care of. You've got things set up so that your bills get paid, you know, all that, you know. Yep. All those little things.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to be in space for 6 months, who's paying the rent?
Right.
Yeah. All right. So Francisco Julio is asking, when you came back to Earth, did you land in the water? And if so, how did you feel when it was discovering that landing on water is not the best way to land?
We did not land on water. Soyuz is designed to come back and land on land, which is what we did. We landed in Kazakhstan, and it can go in the water, but, you know, it's everyone prefers to land on land because, you know, landing in the water it's not necessarily a softer landing, if you will. And landing in the water, well, now that's just one more risk you have to take. You want to make sure that your spacecraft doesn't sink with you in it.
Yeah. I can't remember which spacecraft it was, but it had the astronaut painted a big crack in it, like the famous bell. I remember that.
That was Gus Grissom's first Mercury or second Mercury flight.
Yeah. The Liberty Bell, that was it. Yes. So you're not guaranteed that your return shuttle is going to still be active and stuff after it goes through the fire and stuff, the heat, the intense heat of orbit.
Yeah, you just don't want to be in a sinking ship.
Yeah. All right, so we got another question from Joshua Miguel Roa. It says, he's asking, what is the bravest thing that you did while you were in space?
Well, I don't know if I did anything exceptionally brave. I mean, going out during spacewalks is certainly very exciting, and it's also a little bit more risky than not. And so, I mean, doing the 6 spacewalks I've done were certainly, you know, higher risk, but fortunately everything went well. So I don't know if that's the bravest thing I've done, but I guess it took a little bit.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Constanza Burgos is asking, did you feel fear at some point during the missions?
No, really, we've astronauts have all wanted to do this. Most of us have wanted to do this since we were young, and so we're more excited than anything else. We really not, we don't dwell on the risk. We're well aware of them. We've been trained what to do in emergency procedures, but we also know that we can't deal with everything that could happen. And so, you have to accept the risk at some point and just go forward.
Cool, thank you. There's a question here from, let's see, Xiang and Lin, and they're asking, what would you do if you were injured in space, and would blood flow faster or slower, like say if you got a cut or something?
Yeah, we train for all medical emergencies, including cuts and things like that, so we know how to do first response. And of course, we have a team of doctors on the ground we can talk to. In the worst case, we can all get in the spacecraft and come home. If you do cut yourself, the blood would form in droplets, right? And it wouldn't necessarily flow faster or slower. It would just be, just by nature of having no gravity, any kind of fluid would form into a ball. And for example, when we exercise, when we sweat, since there's no gravity, the sweat doesn't run down your face. The sweat just forms little beads, little balls, and you can use the towel and wipe off.
Huh. Yeah. So, would the blood maybe clot faster because say the bead of blood forms on your arm, and it maybe doesn't big enough to float off of your arm? Would it stay there and maybe help clot faster?
I don't know. My guess is it would not. I mean, the clotting mechanism is different from blood drawing, so I would guess it would not be different, but I don't know for sure. Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Nikita Natarahan is asking, what food do you eat in space?
We have a lot of food items from the military, the meals ready to eat, the little green packets, that you heat up and, eat. And we have a lot of canned food, mostly from the Russian side. And both sides use freeze-dried food where you have to add water to it and then, heat it up and mix it together. And we do all that because we don't have refrigerators on board to store cold food.
Yeah. So everything's in packages, right?
Right. Everything's packaged. Yeah.
Right. Cool. Thank you. Eileen Bastos dos Reis is asking, when you fall in a capsule, like when your capsule's coming down, oftentimes it's spinning and rotating. Do you get really dizzy after you come back, going through that landing experience? Or do you get nauseous, I guess?
Yeah, so capsules, one of the things we do when we come back is the capsule does rotate. It doesn't rotate quickly, but it's similar to a rifle bullet. That allows it, the rotation allows it to be stable. And so it allows it to come back and stay. But it's not rotating super fast. And if I remember correctly, the Soyuz would rotate somewhere around 12, 13 and a half degrees a second. So it's not super fast. So you don't feel that. The reason you're dizzy is not because of that. The real reason you're dizzy is because your inner ear, once it starts sensing gravity again, your brain's forgotten what to do with those signals, and it takes a while for your brain to figure that out again.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you. Another question is from Mila Cross. She's asking, when you go to space, is there climate change, and how does that climate change affect you?
No, when you're up in space, of course, you're in a spacecraft, and so you control your environment. You can change the temperature. You can control it, and so no, there's nothing like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool, thank you. So I remember you talked about seeing the moon landing was kind of part of your experience and inspiration for wanting to be an astronaut. So who exactly was it that inspired you to be an astronaut? Was it seeing Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, or was it someone else that kind of really inspired you apart from that moon landing experience?
Well, the original astronauts were certainly an inspiration. Alan Shepard as the first American to fly into space, and that whole group of people, they were very much pioneers, not kind of. And then, of course, Neil Armstrong, as the first person to walk on the moon was certainly a big inspiration. So I would say the early astronauts, but especially people like those guys were a real inspiration for me.
Cool. Isabel Fraser is asking, what does it feel like when you get into the no gravity? Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. You get very dizzy because now your inner ear balance system is telling nonsense to your brain, and so you get very, very dizzy. You feel a fluid shift immediately because there's no more gravity pulling the fluid down into your legs, so you feel full-headed as if you're standing on your head here on the earth, and
Hmm.
everything's floating, including you. So it's a pretty weird, sensation. But over the next few days, you get used to the idea, and your body starts to kind of equilibrate. But your body doesn't really fully equilibrate till probably over after a month being in space.
So it's a very uncomfortable experience for the first
At first, it's
couple of weeks.
confusing and can make you feel kind of sick. All that dizziness can make you feel sick.
Right. Cool. Thank you. Caitlin Foley asks, what were some of the difficulties and insights from working with people from all over the world?
Well, I would say it wasn't really difficult, but it was interesting. It was great working with people from different cultures. I had to learn about the Russian culture, and I came to embrace it and appreciate it. And it can be difficult if you don't think about it. If you're not aware of these cultural differences, you try to treat everyone, for example, like an American. That's not going to work, right? So when you go to another country or another culture, you have to take the time to learn about that culture and how people interact and how you can be effective in those different cultures. So because I was kind of in tune to that, I didn't really have any difficulties. But some of the people did have difficulties with it, particularly the people who are kind of the more straight line thinkers and wanted things done their way all the time.
Thank you. Joaquin Lorraine is asking, do you think that Star Trek is going to be more like come into realism in the near future? Like some of the ideas, I know a lot of the inspiration for rockets and stuff has come from movies like Star Wars and stuff, and some of the design for the like the Robonaut and stuff has come from Star Wars. So they're asking, do you think some of the ideas and stuff from Star Trek are going to actually come to fruition?
Well, you look at Star Trek, especially the original. Some of them kind of did. Their communicators look like flip phones, right? The little memory cards, that they would stick in the slots looked a lot like floppy disks or flash drives, and so some of that stuff did kind of come true. And of course, that's the nature of sci-fi. People dream about things and they write sci-fi stories and sci-fi gadgets and one day the technology catches up and makes it possible. Even the watches, the smart watches, the Dick Tracy, little watch phone from way back when, that is now a reality. If you want to talk on your watch.
Cool. All right, we've got another question. They're asking, how can space exploration bring benefit to the Earth? And is it possible to give consideration to environmental protection when we develop space technology?
Well, space exploration, of course, is a technology driver. We're trying to make things lightweight, small, compact, and efficient, make things more powerful, like microcomputers. And so the space program has always driven technology. And as far as climate change, I don't know how to address that directly, but certainly any technology that we develop could be used in a positive way for helping with things like that.
Cool, thank you. Another question that we've got, again from Caitlin Foley, is what are or would be the physical requirements to go into space as a tourist?
Well, as a spaceflight participant, NASA's requirements are very much more relaxed than that for an astronaut. Basically, you have to be in good health. Your heart has to be, strong enough to withstand any kind of excitement, things like that. Psychologically, you need to be not, as we mentioned, not claustrophobic, not anxious, not anxiety, things like that. So for a spaceflight participant, it's pretty relaxed, but you have to be in good basic health, though.
Right. Cool. Thank you. We've got from Michaela Bustos. She's asking, how much time do you have to, or do you need to prepare for going on a space mission? And what is the thing that you liked the most when you went to space? And what is the thing that cost you the most to become an astronaut?
Let's see. So the preparation is over a series of years for a space station mission. I trained for 3.5 years to go to the space station. And I don't quite understand the question. Like, what was my favorite thing? Is that
Yeah.
kind of?
Sorry, what was your favorite thing when you were in space? Yeah.
Well, favorite thing is always looking at the Earth and taking pictures. Definitely. Yeah.
Cool. And the other part of her question was, what were some of the costs that you encountered in preparing to go to space? You know,
Well, since I work for NASA, they take care of all the costs. You like money costs? Is that?
I guess I'm wondering maybe like personal costs, like.
Well, you're gone a lot. You're traveling a lot. So if you've got young children at home, that's a sacrifice. If you're, you're gone training a lot, traveling internationally, and I would spend a month in Russia and a month back here. So I guess there's some personal cost to that.
Thank you. Sophia Montanier is asking, do you have a hobby?
Yeah, I have some hobbies. I like flying. I've loved flying airplanes. I've been flying little airplanes for, coming up on almost 36 years now. So that's one of my hobbies.
Cool. There's another question from Pia Marinel Mart, DC Mart. And they are asking if you can share some funny moments or funny stories that happened while you were in space.
Let's see. I don't really know of any funny moments in space. We astronauts, we always play with our food. We're always throwing food to each other and things like that. I guess that's a little bit funny. Kind of drives the public affairs people crazy because they, stop doing that. People are going to think all you do up there is play with your food.
That's funny. Oh, that's funny. Nikita Natarahan is asking, how many astronauts are with you when you flew up in the shuttle? And did you get along well with them?
Yeah, so shuttle missions generally took 7 astronauts at a time. Some had smaller crews of 5 or 6, but generally you're flying with 6 other people on the space shuttle, and generally, everyone's professional, so you at least get along on a professional level, even if you may not have the same points of view on a personal level.
Right.
But generally, everybody gets along.
Cool. Sunya Ho Ho is asking, what do you do for entertainment in space? You talked about taking a lot of photographs. Is there anything else that you would do for entertainment?
Well, of course, we have a pretty good movie library, so you could watch DVDs. They can send electronic books to you. You can read. We spent some time doing email, keeping in touch with our family and friends, and making short phone calls down to the ground. So, that's kind of what we do in our free time. That, and of course, taking the pictures.
Right. Cool. Yeah, I've often wondered, is the internet reception faster or slower on the ISS?
Well, when I was up there, we didn't have real-time internet,
Okay.
And so our inboxes were synchronized every 8 hours. But for the last several years, they have real-time internet, and I don't know the answer to that question, how good the broadband is up there.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, we got time for one last question from Audric King Perez, and they're asking, how many languages do you speak?
Well, I grew up speaking English and Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. My parents were both originally from China, then went to Taiwan after the war, and then immigrated to the U.S. So I grew up speaking those 2 languages. Then I had to learn Russian, of course, to be part of the ISS program. And in high school, I did take some German, so I speak a few words of German, but I'm not going to claim that I know how to speak German.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dr. Leroy.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to visit with everyone. Great questions, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for the great discussion, Caleb. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see you again. I met Leroy in person last January when I was leading one of the expeditions for the space camp. And it was a pleasure then, and it's a pleasure now to meet with you again.
Yeah, great to see you again too.
Say thank you again so
All
very
right.
much. Very pleased to have you, and let's hope the best for the launch later on today.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll be on all kinds of TV stations leading up to it and afterwards, and hopefully we'll see a successful launch. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, goodbye, everyone. Have a great one.